In the year 3681 BBY, a reformed Sith Empire erupted from the shadows and struck the Republic with devastating force, guided by a master whose power and mystery had been cultivated for over a millennium. This empire was not born overnight, but forged as the continuation of an ancient vision, reshaped from the days of a long-dead ruler into something both familiar and terrifyingly new. Just as the Jedi once had their council, so too did this empire embrace a dark council. A circle of schemers and warlords whose ambition, betrayal, and hunger for power ensured the machine of conquest never ceased. Their reign, lasting nearly 4 decades of endless war, became the backbone of Sith domination. Yet the roots of this council stretched further back, to rituals of control and sacrifice that bound thousands of Sith Lords to one will, siphoning their strength to fuel an empire's eternity. From those foundations arose a council that was as much a symbol of unity as it was of treachery, a circle where every ally was a rival and every decision a gamble in a game of power without end. On the ravaged world of Neathema, all life and energy were drained, leaving behind only a stormy gray wasteland, while the dark figure who caused it gained immense power and unnaturally prolonged life. Abandoning his old name, he returned to the Sith homeworld and declared himself Emperor, striking fear into the citizens who cowered before his rule. Proclaiming the Great War a failure, he gathered the last remnants of the Empire and led them on a desperate exodus into the unknown, promising a new future. Yet instead of guiding them directly, he dragged out the journey, ensuring their reliance on him grew until he was no longer just a leader but worshipped as a savior. When they finally reached their new world, the Sith revered him as an all-powerful deity. There, he established a ruling council of 12 mighty lords to govern in his stead, while his true focus shifted towards schemes of ultimate conquest, the collapse of the Republic, and his relentless pursuit of godhood through the secrets of immortality. He had no time for trivial matters, for the threat of the Sith Empire's return loomed ever closer. And so the Dark Council of 12 was born, a reflection of the ancient Dark Jedi who once walked upon Korriban. These 12 acted in his stead, managing the vast empire while their emperor vanished into shadow, pursuing secrets and schemes beyond their grasp. To them, he was both master and phantom, gone for decades, even centuries, leaving entire generations to rule without ever beholding his face. Whispers spread, doubts festered, and yet he remained untouchable. Only twice did the council dare to rise against him. The first, led by a dark lady who gathered her peers at the Citadel's steps, ended in a blinding instant, all 11 consumed, and she herself imprisoned, broken, and left to perish in torment. The second came centuries later, when 3 conspirators sought to defy him, unknowing they were about to awaken the same terror and horror that had destroyed those before them. On the desolate world of Neathema, stripped of life and even of color itself, the truth of their ruler's madness became undeniable. The planet was a void in the Force, driving even the most hardened Sith into insanity, and in that emptiness, whispers of rebellion grew. A daring few rose to challenge the throne, but suspicion soon fell upon them, and their plot unraveled. To prove his dominance, the Emperor summoned 9 unsuspecting counselors, innocent of any treachery, and executed them without hesitation, sending his guard to hunt down the conspirators. This brutal display served as a grim reminder. Betrayal or loyalty made no difference, for his wrath consumed all. The Dark Council, though an ultimate prize of power and influence, became a throne of daggers where each seat was both an honor and a death sentence. As the galaxy edged toward the Great Galactic War, countless Sith clawed for those 12 coveted places. Yet even the few who ascended often reigned for only a fleeting moment before ambition, betrayal, or outside foes swept them into oblivion. Taking a seat on the council was no luxury. Each member carried the weight of a distinct duty, ruling over what were known as the 12 spheres of influence, domains where power was absolute yet often clashed with one another, birthing rivalries and defiance. Though united under the council's banner, each figure was tasked with ensuring the strength of their own sphere, setting the stage for both cooperation and conflict. In this tale, the spotlight falls not on the individuals themselves, but on the council's function, history, and duty. When the Great Galactic War ended with the sacking of Coruscant, the Empire forced a ceasefire that culminated in the Treaty of Coruscant, a one-sided pact that carved nearly half the galaxy into Sith control. What followed was the Cold War, 11 tense years of border skirmishes and hidden battles, where the Jedi sought to rebuild after their temple's fall, while the Sith sharpened their blades in the shadows, each council member preparing their domain for the inevitable return of open war. Yet beneath this uneasy peace, whispers of betrayal stirred, as the Dark Council quietly plotted against their Emperor, even while spheres like Defense of the Empire stood vigilant, eradicating threats within and beyond Imperial reach. In the Empire's grand design, the spheres of military strategy and offense bent to the will of the War Ministry, their defense entrusted to a Sith Lord whose authority towered over the Dark Council. Unlike his peers, he despised their endless scheming, believing their rivalries tore the Empire apart as surely as the Republic. With iron command and severe wisdom, he held the Council in line. Meanwhile, the sphere of military offense became a revolving door of ambition and betrayal. Its purpose, to unleash firepower with ruthless efficiency. One lord sought to reignite galactic war and seize the throne, but his own apprentice struck him down. That apprentice, a shadowy manipulator, spread his web through Republic and Jedi ranks, daring to claim the Emperor's voice only to be silenced with finality. Successors came and fell just as swiftly. One slain by a rival, another refusing to claim the seat, leaving it to yet another who would briefly grasp power before meeting the same fate. Thus, the sphere stood as a testament to the ceaseless hunger, cunning, and downfall of those who sought to master it. There came a time when betrayal struck the Empire, marked by a fall into the shadowy cult of the Revenites. And when the Cold War reached its end, the seat passed directly to Malgus. From there rose the sphere of military strategy, the realm of tactics, invasions, and the vast Imperial Conquest Corps, a sphere whose careful planning gave the Empire its victories. During the Great War, it was commanded by Ozymandias, only for his life to be ended at the hands of Decimus, who seized the seat after arranging a Jedi strike against his rival stronghold. Decimus then led the invasion of Karelia, a campaign that nearly crushed the Republic, until a sudden local resistance shattered his plans. Alongside this stood the sphere of Imperial intelligence, the hidden hand that controlled information, spies, and the secretive Ministry of Intelligence. At its head was Jadis, an enigma cloaked in mystery, his face never seen, his history erased from all records, whispered to be second only to the Emperor himself, though his claim to supremacy was challenged by the power of Ma and Malgus. Finally emerged the sphere of ancient knowledge, guardians of forgotten lore, seekers of ancient languages and the wisdom of Sith kings and lords long past, a domain entrusted to Thanon, who sought strength for the Empire by unearthing the power buried deep in history. He stood at the helm of the Imperial Reclamation Service, digging up ancient relics not just for the glory of the Empire but for his own gain. A proud traditionalist, he schemed his way toward a coveted council seat, luring ambitious rivals with promises of apprenticeship only to send them into cursed tombs where spirits tore them apart. His trick failed against one particularly cunning foe, who turned the tables and claimed the council seat in his place as the Cold War drew to a close. Overseeing the sphere of production and logistics was a pure-blooded master whose charm and sharp wit kept order in endless debates, his long tenure proving both respected and unshakable. Another sphere, expansion and diplomacy, existed more in name than practice, as its overseer focused on conquest for personal ambition rather than true empire building. Then came the sphere of laws and justice, the iron hand of order across the Empire, crushing defiance and demanding loyalty, with its leader standing as a figure of balance who ensured discipline was absolute. The Empire clung to tradition, yet warnings rang that obsession with the past could sabotage the future. One Dark Master enforced the treaty even as another turned his gaze toward the sphere of biotic science, where perfection and annihilation of the flesh were twisted into one. Cybernetic grafts, plagues unleashed, medical dominion, and nightmarish alchemy all lay in his grasp. And his cruelty was infamous. He despised both failure and flattery, punishing all with equal venom. Then rose the sphere of technology, birthing weapons and machines of terror, its throne shifting hands through betrayal and blood, marked by the rise and fall of warlords who left only ruins behind. The sphere of Sith philosophy, meanwhile, clung to the code, spreading venom against their enemies and crushing heresies that dared to balance shadow with light. Its master waged war against those who preached such blasphemy, determined to scour their memory from the Empire itself. And so the Council stood, each sphere a battlefield, each voice a blade, all vying to shape the dark future of the Sith. In the shadowed halls of power stood the Sphere of Mysteries, known as the Keepers of Secrets. A domain cloaked in silence where almost none within the Empire or Council dared question its hidden purpose. It was the Emperor's personal creation, the only one he touched directly, and under the watch of its master it became the guardian of forbidden knowledge and silent blades. Officially, it safeguarded dangerous lore and locked away holocrons scattered across the galaxy, but beneath that mask, it commanded assassins and erased threats before they could rise. This was only one piece of the greater machine, the Dark Council 12 spheres, ruling an empire where Sith philosophy shaped not just their order, but an entire civilization. Unlike later empires veiled in deception, this was unapologetically Sith, a dominion where cruelty was not hidden but declared, and final decisions were enforced by raw power alone. Among these chronicles emerges the strangest paradox of all, a figure who stood as a Sith Lord yet did no evil, the enigma of Darth Vectivis, whose place in the legacy of the rule remains one of the most bewildering tales in their dark history. Once upon a shadowed time, the tale of a Sith unlike any other was whispered by a dark lady to a young seeker, a story that challenged the very essence of the rule of two. How could one wear the mantle of the Sith and yet not descend into cruelty? Doubts and contradictions swirled, many claiming the tale to be a trap, a carefully woven lie meant to lure the impressionable into embracing the darkness. Yet fragments of truth surfaced, revealing that this enigmatic figure was no phantom but a real man, leaving behind a holocron that bore witness to his existence. In the grand halls of Sith lore, his legacy stands apart, an intellect driven not by bloodlust but by curiosity. A master who wielded the dark side without drowning in its poison. His life, his mystery, and the way later Sith judged him remain etched in the chronicles of power, forever unsettling the balance between shadow and reason. Once a businessman with a large family and loyal friends, he lived as nothing more than an ordinary man, unaware of his hidden sensitivity to the Force. Serving as administrator of a remote mining facility on an asteroid simply called home, he could not have known that the very rock was steeped in the dark side, its caverns the remnants of an ancient civilization consumed by shadow. As strange whispers grew louder and workers began to lose their sanity, some even manifesting unnatural powers, he concealed the truth and shut down operation. Yet the pull of the dark side was irresistible. Descending into the depths, he embraced the voices and the power they offered, no longer the practical entrepreneur he once was, but a seeker of forbidden knowledge who would one day be remembered as Vectivis. He sabotaged his own enterprise, pushing it steadily toward collapse so no one else would dare touch the asteroid, making the downfall appear legitimate and silent. With the chapter closed, he left in search of something greater, the Sith, though history falls quiet at this turning point. What is known is that he found a master, inherited the mantle of Dark Lord, and became Darth Vectivis. Yet, unlike others of his kind, the moral framework from his past life clung tightly to him, keeping him distant from the usual Sith lust for conquest and violence. For him, power was not about domination, but immersion, delving into Sith lore, pursuing knowledge, and treating mastery of the dark side as a business of intellect. Years later, he returned to the asteroid and built a colossal mansion in its shadowed heart, continuing his work and perfecting the strange ability known as Force Phantom. This ritual let him draw the astral essence of any being, no matter its form, and mold it into an apparition bound to his will, invisible yet present, a manifestation of his unique Sith path. The Phantoms, visible to sensitives and even through scans, could take whatever form their master chose, serving in roles from messenger to warrior without the summoner's presence required, though distance made them harder to control and the act of conjuring them drained immense power. They were not inherently wicked, since no harm came to the source creature during the calling, yet if the Phantom was destroyed, the anchor perished in the same way, making their use in combat a particularly cruel choice. What stands out is that he never turned them into weapons, strengthening the view that he was not driven by malice. Instead, he pursued wealth and knowledge side by side. his mastery of the dark arts giving him advantage in business while he crafted a holocron to preserve what he learned. His studies advanced so far that he could summon the legions of phantoms with little effort, though curiously, there is no record of him training an apprentice, an omission that leaves only speculation, for without it the tradition itself could not have endured. They mocked him as the very symbol of mediocrity, tossing aside his holocron like rubbish because it was filled not with sinister spells but with ledgers, numbers, and lessons in finance. Its pages carried words like, "Never borrow from someone too strong to defy. Trust your workers, then watch them." Hardly the terrifying wisdom of a dark master. Yet one secret gave the holocron value the Force Phantom technique, the single shard of darkness that kept it from destruction. Lost for centuries thanks to the madness of another Sith, it became a prize hunted in shadows. When it resurfaced, the cult of the Sith seized it and, with cruel humor, offered it as a gift meant to insult. A message that he was worthless, disposable. His legacy, treated with contempt, still raised questions. Was he truly a Sith who ruled without cruelty? Could there really have been one guided by trust and restraint? Or was it all a fragile illusion? A story that never quite added up, especially with doubts over whether he ever spared his own master. They despised him so much that his holocron was tossed aside like worthless junk, for instead of secrets of destruction, it brimmed with ledgers, balance sheets, and cryptic notes on business dealings. Among its strange entries lay advice such as never owing a debt to the powerful and always trusting workers while watching closely. The only reason it survived was the single treasure within, the technique of the Force Phantom. Yet this relic vanished for centuries, lost in the chaos of another Sith's madness, until at last it resurfaced in the shadows of a rising order who seized upon its secret. Delivered mockingly as a gift to one they deemed expendable, the holocron's legacy raised questions about whether its keeper truly was a Sith unlike any other. Whispers lingered that perhaps he ruled without cruelty, that perhaps even those who tempted others into darkness longed for a master guided by principle. Still, contradictions clouded his tale, leaving the truth of his life, his power, and his death wrapped in doubt. Actually had begun. It was a pivotal chapter in the Sith's shadowed saga, the kind of trial that determined who was worthy of carrying the mantle forward. The Master's death was inevitable, whether struck down by the apprentice or surrendered to fate, because without it, the lineage would have been broken. And yet, the one who stood as heir did not follow the path of conquest or domination. Some argue the act of slaying a Sith Master cannot truly be called evil, for it was evil extinguishing evil. Others believe the inheritance was bound by circumstance, that the Master, already frail and fading, chose to pass on all his secrets so the lineage might endure, dying at the very moment the training was complete. In either case, the truth remains cloaked in shadow, a tale of power gained not through wanton destruction, but through a legacy that defied the usual atrocities of the Sith. Illness claimed the businessman who had risen as the new Dark Lord of the Sith, holding the title by technicality rather than through deeds, still maintaining that he had committed no evil by sparing his master, though this remains unconfirmed and is only speculation. The question of his apprentice lingers, absent from records, yet impossible to dismiss, with his supposed peaceful death likely the most doubtful part of his story. If indeed the apprentice did not strike him down, another controversial Sith would have emerged. In the fractured timeline of the Rule of Two, the figure who followed was Darth Gravid, not directly connected, yet possibly tied as apprentice, though never explicitly stated. Should that be true, it would unravel another mystery of Sith's succession. Gravid, consumed by the lure of Jedi lore, sought to fuse opposing traditions until madness drove him to rebuild the Sith from ashes, destroying their own legacy of knowledge. His apprentice ended him, but not before priceless scrolls, holocrons, and records, among them the holocron of Vectivis, were lost. This link may explain why Gravid's obsession with Jedi ways ran so deep, for if his master was the Sith who claimed to do no evil, then perhaps the seed of heresy had already been planted. If the apprentice had never slain the one who trained him, the ritual bond to the dark side would never have been sealed, leaving his claim to the mantle hollow and illegitimate. The chronicles reveal that the act of killing a master is not mere ceremony, but the very ignition of Sith ascension, the moment when the dark side itself anoints and empowers the chosen vessel. Through this ritual, power floods like fire through stone, elevating the killer to staggering heights and granting clarity of purpose as a true Dark Lord. Without such a trial, had the master simply faded away in peace, the apprentice would have inherited nothing but a legacy of business-like restraint, drifting toward compassion that echoed uncomfortably close to Jedi ideals, a flaw he unknowingly passed on. This fracture in tradition explains why later Sith scorned him, branding his line as the one that weakened their order for centuries. And so, in the ruins of a fortress consumed not by battle but by fire from within, the echo of betrayal lingers, its hollow halls whispering of power lost, lessons unlearned, and the shadow of a legacy that undid itself. It was a tomb, not for bodies, but for knowledge, sealed away because what happened inside was not collapse but a purge, a wound carved into the Sith legacy that would bleed for centuries, and at the center stood a man who called himself Darth Gravid, a scholar and heretic who nearly annihilated the very order he vowed to perfect. He forged a doctrine named the Unifying Path, a vision so radical it drove him to burn holocrons, shatter artifacts, and erase rituals not in rage but in faith, for he believed the dark side was incomplete, that the Sith had drowned in their obsession with domination, and he sought to mend that void with the very light they despised, not to corrupt, but to synthesize, to bind opposites into balance. Yet in doing so, he brought his own kind to the brink of extinction, centuries after the rule of two had hardened Sith into cold succession, where knowledge was hoarded and survival meant everything. Gravid walked another road, choosing study over cruelty, doubt over wrath, delving into Jedi texts not as enemy but as student, until obsession transformed into a dangerous new philosophy, one that questioned the foundations of darkness itself. And in his heresy, the Sith Order nearly crumbled. He believed true power came from embracing both light and dark, compassion and passion, restraint and fury, serenity and ambition. He envisioned an order that could transcend the divide, but the Force punished contradiction. To walk between light and dark was to stand on a blade's edge, cut from both sides. As he pursued his vision, his bond with the Force fractured the dark, recoiled at his hesitation. The light rejected his corruption. Balance slipped into imbalance, meditation into obsession, thought into fragments, and his very identity broke apart. Worst of all, his faith in the Sith tradition collapsed. In secret, he built a hidden bastion and gathered a vast treasury of forbidden knowledge rituals of the Golden Age, doctrines of alchemy, techniques etched in ancient holocrons. At the core of it all, he guarded one ultimate power, essence transfer, the closest thing to immortality, a ritual allowing spirit to leap from body to body. Discovered in antiquity, refined by Dark Lords, and obsessed over for generations, it was said he may have perfected it, holding in his hands the last complete path to eternal survival. And then, he destroyed it. The ritual was not lost to time but to flame, sacrificed in his attempt to purify the Sith, leaving future seekers to claw desperately at fragments of what once was whole. Behind the burning walls of his fortress, a Sith Lord once believed he could save the Order by destroying it. Consumed by obsession, he sealed himself away, raised barriers of power, and turned fire upon holocrons, scrolls, and relics eras of knowledge reduced to ash. Into this graveyard stepped his apprentice, forged in pain and bound by the rule of two. She found no wisdom, only betrayal, a master who had turned his blade inward, a heretic who consigned their inheritance to flames. With fury and purpose, she shattered his defenses, pushing through smoke and ruin until she stood before him, the air thick with ash and the weight of everything he had erased. There, amid the wreckage of empires lost, apprentice faced master. Shadow confronted flame, and the legacy of the Sith trembled on the edge of annihilation. His robes hung in tatters, his face pale and hollow, yet he stood unarmed, the lightsaber at his waist untouched. Eyes not blazing with hate but with certainty as he whispered that he had prayed the truth would be seen. Her silence cut sharper than any blade, her stance already a verdict. While he confessed the Sith were broken, that legacies of pain only burned to ash, that Jedi denied emotion while Sith worshipped it. Both incomplete, and only together could something greater rise. His hand sweeping to the flames of knowledge he had destroyed for the sake of the future. But she stepped forward, declaring he had destroyed everything. And the clash began, his blade igniting not from rage but necessity, his movements flowing with an almost meditative grace, a rhythm stripped of fear yet charged with overwhelming power, while hers struck fast and brutal, no lesson, only intent to kill. Sparks bursting like fleeting memories against the ruins of lost Sith rituals, the chamber echoing with fire and steel, and still he endured, whispering that she did not yet see. He hissed through the chaos, claiming they could be more than Sith, they could be whole. Yet even as the words left his mouth, his strikes faltered, his stance broke, his very ideology splintered mid-duel. Rage tangled with serenity. Instinct collided with hesitation. His blade torn between the precision of a Jedi and the brutality of a Sith until he was becoming nothing at all. The breaking point came not from dominance but from ruin, as a vicious slash carved deep across his apprentice's body, burning flesh and shattering bone, leaving her mutilated and on her knees, yet unbroken. With no retreat, no surrender, she rose, stripped of weapon but not of purpose, and in her agony unleashed raw, desperate power that tore the saber from his grasp. Pain became her weapon, betrayal her fuel, and with unrelenting fury she ended him not with a blade but with her own hands. His eyes widened, not in terror but in recognition, whispering his final words before silence claimed him. She stood, scorched, ruined, one arm in shreds. Yes, she stood, not victim, not survivor, but Sith. It was not triumph of strength, but of sacrifice, for his fractured path had left him abandoned by the Force, proving a truth older than their creed. The Sith cannot endure divided. The Force is a balance, yet some choose to twist it. The darkness feeds on extremes, and where the Jedi flow with its current, the Sith seek to bend it to their will. To reach for both paths is to drown, and in that drowning lay the ruin of an entire legacy. The clash that followed would become the greatest duel of the Rule of Two, for with one master's death came the loss of countless secrets, rituals of sacrifice, ancient alchemy, the whispers of spirits bound to talismans all gone in flame. What one master sought, and what another would later dedicate a lifetime to reclaiming, vanished within a single generation. The survivor of that ruin, scarred and broken, bore the weight of the future on her mutilated frame. Some say she rebuilt herself with Sith machinery until pain became power. Others that she lingered only long enough to pass on her knowledge before death claimed her. Whatever the truth, without her, the Sith would have perished within those burning walls. The fortress that once held echoes of power fell silent, its scrolls reduced to smoke, its voices gone. She emerged from the ashes not as conqueror or victim, but as vessel of pain, of survival, of the Rule of Two. Yet the cost was immeasurable, for her master did not die alone. He dragged nearly all their legacy with him, leaving the Sith to crawl forward from shadows where once they stood in fire. Their world had always been defined by power, not only in its pursuit, but in the desperate ways they clung to it. Rituals, relics, sorcery, alchemy. To them, knowledge was as sacred as dominance, for without it there could be no ascension, no legacy, no survival. Yet one figure shattered that chain, erasing centuries of secrets in a single purge. Among the knowledge lost was the ritual of essence transfer, the forbidden art of hurling one's spirit into a new body, defying death itself. Masters obsessed over it, apprentices feared it, and emperors perfected it, using it to reign for generations under countless masks. Through it, one had become more than a ruler, almost a god. Others, desperate to reclaim what was gone, poured lives and empires into vain attempts to rediscover the ritual that had already been destroyed. What took lifetimes to seek was erased in an instant, making the destroyer one of history's greatest failures. But the ruin did not end there. Rituals of mass sacrifice, where entire populations were drained to fuel apocalyptic might, were wiped away too. Powers once wielded by ancient lords, terrible and unmatched, vanished forever in that act of madness. Without hesitation, the tale unfolds like a cosmic tragedy. These were not weapons for war, but world-shattering incantations, powers meant to summon, to corrupt, to twist reality itself. By the time of later generations, the arts had already faded. Yet one figure clawed fragments back from forgotten holocrons, rituals of suffering that turned death into fuel and then cast them into the fire. Spirit anchoring, the ancient hallmark of lords who bound their essence to relics and lingered beyond death, was obliterated. Alchemy, too, once able to warp flesh and spawn abominations, was resurrected in part, only to be erased again in flames. He was a collector, a completionist of forbidden lore, and in destroying it, he reshaped the legacy of his kind. What lingers is a haunting paradox. For when the Age of Restoration came, it was built not on untouched greatness, but on the ashes of what he had burned away. Already lost in ruins, Sidious's obsession with temples, his endless hunt for ancient holocrons, his clones, vessels, and libraries, all trace back to one truth. He did not inherit a legacy, only fragments left behind by Gravid. Every artifact he twisted, every excavation he pursued was an attempt to rebuild what should have been his by right. Yet even with all his power, he never recovered what had been destroyed. This is why many believe the ancients were greater, their strength not in duels or deception, but in rituals that reshaped life, defied death, and bent existence itself. Later Sith, sharpened and efficient under the rule of two, lost that cosmic flame, trading vast mastery for precision. In history, only one figure mirrored Gravid's fall, Traya. Both saw beyond rigid dogma, rejecting the cages of Jedi and Sith alike. But while Traya turned her fury against the Force itself, Gravid sought harmony, believing serenity and passion could unite, that empathy could amplify strength, that balance was not weakness but perfection. Yet in striving to hold both paths at once, he broke apart. She saw futility, he saw promise, but both defied the uncompromising nature of the Force, and in that defiance lay their undoing. He was broken by his attempt to merge two opposing truths, walking a road that no one had ever survived before. Not because it was unthinkable, but because it was unsustainable. And that was his final tragedy. Brilliant, yet doomed. Even in collapse, he unleashed a fury that nearly ended his own apprentice. Had he fully embraced shadow, he could have stood among the greatest. Had he chosen light, he might have been revered as wise, but by clinging to both, he was abandoned by the very power he sought to unite. His unifying vision was inevitable, for where one sought domination, another would always seek understanding. Yet, the darkness does not grow. It consumes, and in trying to save his order, he nearly destroyed it. His name became taboo, his memory erased, his legacy whispered only in secret. But the shadow of his failure haunted those who came after, shaping fears, obsessions, and the hunger for control. What was once the heart of darkness itself, a world that inspired awe and terror, decayed into myth as centuries passed. Its power fading until it was dismissed and forgotten by those who once built empires upon its soil. Long ago, the birthplace of the Sith lay silent, its legacy buried beneath dust and shadow, unspoken even among apprentices and never visited by the dark enforcer who followed. Once, however, this world had roared with power, called by some the loudest voice of the dark side, where the unforgiving sands shaped a people whose lives revolved around war, conquest, and survival. Here, ancient kings forged rituals that bound the very soil to darkness, and when exiled Jedi arrived, they embraced these grim traditions, learning from the Valley of the Dark Lords where tombs whispered with the secrets of fallen rulers. Each new grave deepened the world's corruption, every death of a dark master adding weight to its sinister aura. Spirits lingered, restless and venomous, pouring hatred into the air, ensuring the planet itself became both a cradle and a graveyard of darkness, forever echoing with the power of those who once ruled. The ancient world of shadows was a place where creators of forbidden relics were entombed beside their own works, from holocrons to scrolls infused with dark secrets, and for millennia the desolate planet radiated its power like a beacon to those who called themselves Sith. Yet even as whispers of this strength lingered, time and raids from the Jedi drained much of its might. When the Great War erupted and the Sith failed to conquer the Republic, the enemy stormed their sacred world, looting temples and tombs, determined to erase every trace of the dark teachings. Though they purged countless vaults of knowledge, they could not silence the wrath of the ancient spirits, who struck out with fury against the intruders. The resting places of the Dark Lords became so perilous that the Jedi eventually chose to erase the world's very existence from their records, hiding its location forever. In the end, the graves remained, stripped of much of their power, yet still echoing with defiance. A haunted monument to what was lost and what refused to die. The planet lay in silence, once a crucible of endless wars, now nothing more than a graveyard of bones and whispering spirits. The Golden Age had long since shattered, leaving no masters, no rituals, no hate, only ruin. Yet time refused to let it sleep. Visitors came, drawn by its shadow, and the Sith returned again and again to rekindle its darkness. In the Age of XR, the tombs revealed secrets, and an academy rose under the gaze of a new master, shaping recruits for millennia while the Jedi, broken and weary, turned a blind eye. Their neglect allowed the dark teachings to thrive unchecked, a seed that would grow until Revan and Malak arrived, not for reverence, but for a hidden map leading to power beyond imagination. There, amidst the stones of a forgotten world, the cycle of rise and fall began anew. In the shadowed halls of Korriban, one name rose, Uthar Wynn, who hailed two Sith as rightful heirs of the Empire, swearing loyalty and sending forth legions of students forged in darkness. To Wynn and his followers, the sacred ground of Korriban mattered more than the grand designs of those fallen Jedi who wore Sith titles only as tools for their greater legacy, bound to the power of the Starforge. But when redemption shattered one and defeat consumed the other, the Academy collapsed without a single Jedi blade drawn, as the Sith themselves tore each other apart in a brutal civil war that reduced Korriban to ruin once more. In time, only fragments remained, a diminished academy spitting out assassins trained by cold machines instead of true masters, proof that the Sith flame was dying. Their last embers flickered out with the fall of the Triumvirate, leaving the Jedi to encircle Korriban with steel and blockade the world into silence. Decades passed, and though the planet whispered with restless spirits and prowling beasts, its voice grew quieter. Yet history is a cycle of shadows, and when the reconstituted Empire rose, the Sith clawed their way back, seizing Korriban in a storm of vengeance, as if the darkness itself refused to fade. From the depths of hyperspace they struck, launching a furious assault to reclaim their lost world, led by a fearsome master and his young apprentice. Once retaken, the planet rose from ruin, its ancient pyramid rebuilt, its academy restored, and from its harsh sands emerged new generations of dark warriors and cunning inquisitors. Training was merciless, with students hurled into spirit-haunted tombs, forced to recover relics just to prove their worth, while scholars unearthed the planet's buried past more out of reverence than discovery. Yet as the Empire shifted its heart to another capital, the old world grew quieter, its power fading into silence, its hold on the Sith loosening. Meanwhile, their rivals desecrated the tombs, stripping away relics, seizing bodies of ancient lords, draining the dark energies with chilling efficiency. And so, the centuries rolled on, until millennia later, the once mighty cradle of darkness lay hushed, its legacy scattered to dust. The clash between light and darkness brought forth the last academy on a world once sacred to the Sith, but this time it stood hollow, its legacy fading to whispers. No longer a stronghold of forbidden power, it allowed only one ambitious figure to seek its secrets. He wandered among crumbling scrolls and echoing tombs, convinced that the Brotherhood had abandoned truths too dangerous to forget. Against all warnings, he braved the Valley of the Dark Lords, defying death at the fangs of beasts, only to uncover nothing but dust, bones, and silence. Yet from that silence came revelation, the understanding that true strength would no longer rest in ancient ruins, but in a new order, forged by his will. When the Brotherhood fell, the planet remained only as a birthplace remembered, a symbol stripped of power, while he carried forward the lesson that the past held no treasures, only warnings. The tale unfolds like a dark comic strip, with a master dismissing the hallowed worlds once thought sacred, mocking them as little more than cemeteries stripped bare by treasure hunters and tourists. The apprentice, eager for forbidden power, demands to know why they never journeyed to these legendary planets, only to be chastised for impatience and for chasing illusions. The master warns that what lies there is not strength but danger, whispers of spirits that bring only death. In secret curiosity, he once dared to test these myths himself, hoping to uncover whether awareness could survive beyond the grave, perhaps even unlocking a path to eternal life. Yet the journey ended in silence and disappointment, the tombs answering nothing, the thrones of ancient rulers empty, their ghosts reduced to fading tales meant to distract. As he set foot upon his ship bound for the Valley of the Dark Lords, a spectral figure appeared, an ancient Sith spirit, fierce and unyielding, questioning his right to the title and mocking his plans to unravel tradition. The Phantom's words offered no answers, only contempt, before vanishing into smoke, leaving him to wonder if it had all been nothing more than a trick of the mind. Yet the denials of one master stood against the harsh annotations of another, who swore the spirits were real, dangerous, and treacherous, whispering riddles before striking with deadly malice. On that desolate world, nothing awaited but death, and any search for power proved hollow. Still, he returned, first demanding secrets and suffering their wrath, saved only by his servant, and later once more when his failing body left him desperate. In the end, the rule of two was right. There was nothing to gain. Yet one last shadowy figure broke that cycle of futility, uncovering a relic hidden since the dawn of their order, a holocron guarded by the spirit of one of the first dark visionaries who would rise from beyond to train anew. He was trained in the ways of the Sith until he rose as Darth Gravid, who upon returning to the tomb world-built the one Sith Empire, hiding in stasis for decades beneath the gaze of the Jedi Temple. From the shifting sands of that desolate place, the Sith were reborn, claiming it once more and forging the rule of one. To the Jedi, the Force was harmony, a living current binding all life, but to the Sith it was domination, a well of power that crushed the weak. Yet beyond both orders stood the heretics, who dared to see it differently. Among them was Darth Traya, who denounced the Force as a cruel god, a puppeteer to be defied. But this tale shifts to something darker still, the rise of Darth Ruin, once a Jedi Master, who believed only his mind could contain the truth of the Force. To him, the galaxy, the Sith, the Jedi, all were wrong, and with words alone he led 50 Jedi into exile, raising a new Sith cult from the ashes. But the same belief that gave him power consumed him, and in the end his own followers struck him down, too fearful of the monster they had helped create. This is not a tale of battles or duels, but of a mind so certain in its own vision that it bent others to believe as well. Before Ruin claimed him, he was a master of the Order, dangerous not through action, but through thought. He saw truth, morality, even the Force itself as illusions shaped by perception, and only his perception was real. His heresy was subtle, whispering that all codes and philosophies were flawed lenses, that every being was blind to the Force except him. This was no simple arrogance, but solipsism, the belief that only his own consciousness truly existed. Brilliant, persuasive, and unshakably confident, he dismantled his critics with calm precision and a smile, never raging, always convincing. The council tried to contain him, but nothing worked, for he was not just a heretic, he was a philosopher with followers ready to listen. And so, he walked away from the Order, not in exile, but in certainty, stepping toward a destiny that would shatter the galaxy. He didn't leave in disgrace. He walked away because he believed there was nothing left to learn from the Order or anyone else. On that day, he left behind words that would echo through centuries. The Force shall free me. Not us, not them, me. Vanishing from official records, he didn't retreat at first. He spoke in forgotten corners of the galaxy, not as a conqueror, but as a thinker. He wrote, lectured, debated, and listened. Those who felt stifled by doctrine gathered around him. Not warriors, but seekers. Then, without a fight, 50 Jedi followed him out. No battles, no bloodshed, only words. He didn't tempt them with power. He shattered their certainty, gave their doubts purpose, made them believe the Force was more than they had been taught. And when he had them, he disappeared. The Order, left fractured and afraid, had faced deserters before, but never one who won hearts with nothing but ideas. He never raised his blade, only a mirror, daring others to face their own reflection. And in that moment, the philosopher was no more. Ruin was born. Disappearing into the stars after luring 50 Jedi to his cause, he did not return with an army or a war cry, but with something far more unsettling: patience. He wandered among the forgotten tombs of the old Sith, across worlds reduced to whispers and ghost stories, and there he found the scattered remnants, cults, tribes, warlords, clutching fragments of lost doctrine. To them he came not as a conqueror, but as a prophet, declaring that the Sith had not fallen from weakness, but from corruption, from rivalry, from blind tradition. He alone, he preached, could restore them. Some resisted, some bowed, but slowly, relentlessly, he gathered them into something new. Not the Sith of old, but a cult bound, not just by power, but by meaning, a unifying creed of the dark side that promised eternity beyond death and war. And whether through awe, fear, or belief, they followed. And in their following lay the true terror of ruin. He did not just command, he converted. In the ruins of fallen empires, a new order rose, not forged in fear, but in blind devotion. He did not simply revive the Sith, he made himself their very reason to exist. Under his banner, scattered tribes were gathered and then broken again, for his purpose was never conquest, vengeance, or rule. Unlike the Sith, who sought strength through conflict or cunning, his were bound only by faith in him. Yet the longer they followed, the clearer the truth became. To him, they were nothing. Not allies, not apprentices, not even tools, merely shadows orbiting his light. He called them squires, denying them dignity, and sacrificed them without reason. Loyalty meant nothing. Devotion was irrelevant, and even his chosen was no more than a placeholder in his self-made mythology. What he built was not an empire, but a cult of madness, where worship fed his delusion and suffering was the only gift he returned. He wielded faith not as a cleansing fire, but as proof of his own supremacy. And when hushed rumors spread that his rule would end in a ritual of self-deification, he ignored them. For to acknowledge a threat was to admit another could matter. That was the true horror of this dark philosopher. He did not aspire to godhood. He believed he already was divine. His reign blazed like a storm, brief yet catastrophic, uniting the Sith into a single creed and igniting the conflict that would scar the galaxy for 1,000 years. But in his certainty, he sowed his own doom. He dismissed his disciples as nothing, blind to the truth that even nothingness will fight to survive. Whispers of rituals, of their essence drained for his ascension, drove them to conspire not out of ambition or vengeance, but fear. And so, the cult he had forged, the galaxy reshaped in his image, turned against him. The self-crowned god who believed he alone could wield the Force was undone by those he had deemed beneath notice. He was struck down, not by Jedi, not by the Republic, but by those who once swore loyalty to him and he never saw it coming. Because how could nothing destroy a god? His death wasn't an ending, it was the spark of an inferno. The Sith rose again, splintering into factions, each clinging to fragments of his vision, while the galaxy descended into endless war. Republic forces bled, Jedi armies rose and crumbled, and his madness seeped into history like a contagion. Though he never conquered a single world, his creed ignited a 1,000-year conflict that would only burn out at Ruusan. One Sith survived that reckoning. One who saw the flaw in the chaos and forged the rule of two to ensure it would never happen again. To him, the fallen philosopher was both a warning and a lesson, a prophet who shattered Jedi with words, united Sith with belief, yet perished not by enemy blades, but by his own blind faith. And the chilling truth? He almost won. He twisted the galaxy not with fire, but with words, reshaping belief itself until he stood as the center of all meaning, a god in every way but name. His downfall was not born of error but of arrogance, for he believed no one but himself could ever be right. The Sith do not always rise in flame. Sometimes they rise in thought, and the Force itself can become nothing more than a mirror, reflecting back only ego. He did not corrupt by killing, he corrupted by convincing, by erasing the worth of all others. In a galaxy ruled by belief, that alone was enough. Terrifying in his madness, he was not content with ruling the galaxy. He sought to erase it, to replace it with himself. Where others like Vader and Dooku carried the weight of trauma and legacy, his horror lay in the void within him, a delusion so complete it consumed reality itself. That is what made him the most frightening of them all, the Sith who did not just want dominion, but annihilation. He was never a father who loved, only a shadow wearing masks. Born as Tenebrae, son of a Sith Lord and a terrified peasant, he was a dark side prodigy who killed without remorse, enslaving a world at 10 and draining its life by 20, leaving it a hollow grave where even the Force was absent. Names meant nothing to him, only disguises. As centuries passed and his immortality began to fracture, he set his eyes on a new prize, a world unspoiled by Jedi or Sith. There, he stole the life of a beloved warrior, hollowing him out and wearing his body like a cloak. The people worshipped a god, never knowing their hero was gone. From his throne, he forged the Eternal Empire, rejecting Jedi and Sith alike, drawing followers across the stars. But it was not freedom, it was dominion dressed as harmony, a silent world beneath the gaze of a cold god who ruled not as a father, but as a nightmare eternal. He did not age, nor inherit, nor feel, yet to mask that truth he bound himself to a warrior and called it family. Though in his mind they were never children, only weapons. The twins were born into luxury, but raised as soldiers, stripped of warmth, molded in obedience. One grew steady, calm, gifted. The other restless, craving approval that never came, denied by design. Praise was given only to divide, love twisted into envy, unity forged only to be shattered. Side by side they conquered, until their father saw loyalty bent toward brotherhood instead of him, and he pulled away. Into that emptiness grew jealousy, into jealousy grew hatred, and in one furious moment, brother struck brother. Blood met silence, and the father's plan was complete. The survivor was left broken, pliable, a shadow of the one who made him. Yet tragedy was not done. For where the twins were forged, their sister was shattered, born with power that bent reality, tearing apart the world even as a child. She was a storm contained in the body of a child, a power unmatched in the galaxy, and even her own mother trembled at what she could become. But the man who should have protected her saw only utility, not love. He dragged her to a world of shadows and silence, buried her laughter under layers of pain, and carved away everything that made her human. When she emerged, she was no longer a daughter, but a weapon, forged to serve his will. His cruelty was never born of weakness. It was deliberate, methodical, a design to consume rather than to create. To him, family was never family, only a means to an end, empty vessels to hold fragments of his ambition until they, too, could be discarded. And as he stood over the ruin of what had once been his child, he smiled, for he had not lost a daughter, he had gained a tool. They were never children in his eyes, only weapons forged to serve a purpose and discarded when that purpose ended. Arkin, Thexan, and Valen were treated as tools, instruments wielded by a god masquerading as a father, each one designed to shatter in time. Arkin's downfall came not by chance, but by a slow starvation of affection. Jealousy planted in him by the very man whose approval he craved most. Approval that never came. For an unloved child is easy to control. Thexan, who might have balanced his brother's rage, was erased the moment his loyalty turned elsewhere. Valen, too powerful, too radiant, too untamed to bend, was broken before she could rise, taught not to command her gifts, but to fear them. To fear herself until madness claimed her, a madness that was never hers alone, but inherited. To call them a family would be a lie, for families share bonds, joys, and pains, while he shared nothing, standing instead as a cold axis around which they orbited yet never touched. Blood tied them, but spirit kept them apart, each isolated by his design. Arkan consumed by resentment, Thexan sacrificed to obedience, Valen turned into a weapon and locked away lest she turn against him. He did not destroy their bonds. He ensured they never had any, raising not children, but ghosts. And even in death, he lingered, his shadow whispering into dreams, haunting visions, taking the shapes of father, mentor, God, whatever was needed, not a legacy but a curse. For he never believed in letting go, and to let go would have meant admitting the truth. He lingered not to live, but to dominate, drowning in guilt, pain, and nightmares, even clinging to stolen faces and false voices to keep his lie alive. To him, family was never sacred, never love, never duty, it was only strategy. His children were not people, but extensions of his will, vessels for a poisoned inheritance of rage, madness, and grief. Where others, broken as they were, still stumbled toward love, he rejected it outright, twisting fatherhood into a weapon, crafting heirs only to shatter them, binding them in chains of love turned cruel, discarding them as stepping stones to godhood. In the end, he left not a dynasty, but a crater, a hollow where love and legacy should have stood. Children who should have been heirs were instead broken, for the darkest figure in the galaxy was never truly a father at all. The question lingers like a shadow did. The most feared ruler in history ever feels something as fragile as love for his wife. In the age when he prepared his great conquest, he split his will once more, taking on the body of a foreign man and forging an eternal empire. There, he bound himself to a woman who bore him 3 children, 2 twins bound in destiny and 1 daughter of terrible power. Some remember fleeting days when joy seemed real, leading to the haunting question: did he truly love her, or was he forever too far beyond human warmth? The chronicles suggest otherwise, for in Sith tradition, marriage was never as simple as it appeared. Behind the curtains of bloodlines and legacy, power outweighed affection, and even the illusion of family was only another weapon in his grasp. Among the Sith, heritage dictated status, and family ties were weapons rather than bonds. Love was weakness. Unions were forged only to breed strength, ensuring bloodlines sharpened like blades to cut deeper into the Empire's hierarchy. Even passion, when it flared, was fleeting and disposable, as were the partners themselves if sacrifice promised greater power. Yet he stood apart. With supremacy already in his grasp and a mind consumed by delusions of godhood, he had no need for legacy, no intention to bind himself to another. To him, all others were mere insects beneath his heel. That was until his relentless pursuit of ultimate ascension led him to a distant world steeped in mystery, where a people guarded an ancient secret capable of reshaping the galaxy itself, the Eternal Fleet, and the throne that commanded it. Vitiate's gaze was pulled toward the strange weapons of Zakuul, and in them he saw a chance to shape eternity itself. Obsessed with the devotion of the people, he cast off the role of mere ruler and instead crowned himself as the Eternal Emperor, his mind and strength now living within Valkorion's form. With the creation of the Eternal Fleet, a terrifying armada of machine-guided ships whose precision outmatched all rivals, his empire rose as a storm beyond the reach of Republic or Sith. For centuries, he balanced 2 thrones, guiding both Sith and Eternal alike, until the war erupted and the Republic found itself collapsing under sudden assault. As Jedi and Sith destroyed each other in endless struggle, Vitiate quietly built his true design, not only a fleet but an army without end, an eternal force forged to secure his dominion forever. In the shadow of a looming destiny, he encountered her unyielding, fierce, and unlike any of the others. She had clawed her way from the ranks of the Knights, not through borrowed strength, but through a raw connection to the Force that no master could claim credit for. She became one of their finest, her power her own, her will unbound. It wasn't her blade alone that caught his attention, it was her voice, sharp and fearless, cutting through the chorus of empty praise that surrounded him. While sycophants bowed and whispered obedience, she dared to challenge him, to defy even his decrees when they weakened the empire she vowed to protect. He, a man who fancied himself untouchable, a god among insects, found himself intrigued then captivated. To him, she was no ant. She was proof that even a god could meet an equal. 2 years would pass, and what began as defiance turned to desire, a bond forged in power and defiance of fate itself. The elite guard turned queen of the Eternal Empire once stood beside the ruler of the Eternal Throne. Though many remember him as cold and unfeeling, she did not. In her memories, there had been moments of happiness between them, though never the softness of roses, for he was not that kind of being. Their union, however, was real and strong, at least for a time. She described it simply. What they had was not a child's dream of love, but it was happiness. That fragile balance shattered when the twins were born. She adored them deeply, yet they rejected her, and their father rejected them in turn. From that moment, everything began to unravel. The war with the Republic flared. Victories, once certain for the Sith, faltered as the Jedi rallied their armies, forcing the Empire back. The Emperor was compelled to abandon his vessel, drawing his focus to the Sith body to command directly. While his power allowed him to split his essence, his attention was finite, and when withdrawn, his host became hollow shells, expressions erased, moving only on pre-written designs, like puppets awaiting the master's return. He was always aware of what they were doing, for they were still him, yet his full attention could rest only in one place at a time, and because of this, the once warm figure she had known turned cold, distant, and dangerous. She never understood why his change came so swiftly, how his shadow fell heavy with gloom, how he cast aside their children as though they were nothing. She tried to fill that void with love, but her sons spurned her. Their eyes looked only to their father, craving the praise they would never receive. And still, despite the hardness of his heart, she bore him a daughter. This time, she tried to raise her differently, teaching her to value family and love over strength and power. But the girl discovered her might in the Force was far beyond her brothers. She watched them train, longed to be as they were, but her gifts were perilous, even to him. From the womb, she had moved the world around her, and as a child, she became deadly. In one moment of innocent play, a guard lost his life in a storm of power she could not control. Her mother tried to guide her, but again and again she slipped, leaving death in her wake, nights falling by accident to her strength. He saw much of it, both fascinated and unsettled, for in her he glimpsed his own reflection, and one day, her mother came to him, pleading. She was broken, and fear clung to everyone around her. The guards trembled. Even her own mother hesitated to reach out, too frightened to show warmth or guidance. But her father chose a cruel path. He caged her mind, locking away her power and dragging her to a desolate world stripped of all connection to the Force. There, zealots shattered her with merciless reconditioning, twisting her from a fragile girl into a hollow predator without empathy. Her mother, sensing her agony, stormed the place and fought to free her, only to have the daughter reject her, consumed by hatred and convinced she had been cast aside like a monster. Left behind, she severed all ties, while her father reappeared and dragged her mother back into chains. At last, the queen realized the truth. Her children were no longer safe. Her husband was mad, and the family she longed to save now despised her. When she tried again, even her sons turned against her, pledging loyalty to the tyrant. With nothing left but resolve, she walked away to join the resistance, swearing to end his reign. Yet the tyrant let her go, for to him, the children were more than heirs. They were perfect vessels, kept close, not out of love, but for the dark eternity he planned to carve through them. He stood as an empty shell draped in power, a being who had carved away every shred of feeling to achieve immortality, leaving behind only an insatiable hunger for control and a fear of losing it. The question of whether he ever loved his wife becomes almost laughable. Under this shadow there was no love, no warmth, only calculation. His so-called fascination with another was nothing more than a predator's intrigue and strength, a passing amusement. Their union, stripped of tenderness or shared purpose, was no more than a duty fulfilled, as hollow as the empire he eventually abandoned. To him, she was an experiment, a failed venture he had long since outgrown. For at his core lay a void darker than the abyss of space, a heart that sought silence, not connection. In the endless ledger of Sith atrocities, his tale is not of passion, but of a man who had severed all ties to life itself in eternal shadow, incapable of love, leaving behind only the ruins of those who once believed in it. From the very beginning, she was never like the others, questioning whether destiny itself was a prison while her peers surrendered to it. Gifted with an uncommon sensitivity to the currents of the Force, she became a philosopher and historian, driven not by conquest but by an insatiable thirst for knowledge, believing that only by understanding all sides of the Force could wisdom be found. Among her students was a prodigy whose defiance led to catastrophe, and when he fell into darkness, the Council turned their blame on her. Cast out and accused of birthing the galaxy's greatest threat, she carried with her the wound of betrayal and the seed of doubt, suspecting the Force itself to be a manipulative power without morality. Her exile drew her to the dead world of Malachor, where she witnessed the dark side, not as theory, but as will made flesh, beings who had surrendered entirely to its grip, revealing to her the terrifying possibility that all life was but a pawn in a cosmic game. From teacher to exile, from philosopher to heretic, she became the one who dared to challenge the will of the Force itself, remembered not only as a betrayer but as a tragic figure whose life was a testament to sorrow, obsession, and the perilous pursuit of forbidden truth. She was once a teacher whose lessons echoed her own doubts, urging her students to think beyond the rigid chains of the Order. When war erupted, she watched in silence as the Council stood frozen, their faith blinding them while worlds burned. She never forced her pupils to follow her, only to question. Yet when one returned from battle as an enemy, she was condemned as the corrupter, the architect of downfall. Cast out and alone, she began to wonder if the Force was no benevolent guide at all, but an indifferent tide that shaped destinies without mercy. While others clung to the belief that its will was good, she asked the forbidden question: what if destiny itself was only another cage? Exile was not her true torment. but the hypocrisy of those who once praised her search for hidden truths and then shunned her for uncovering them. In time, this quiet defiance led her to the shattered world of Malachor, where she embraced the name of Darth Traya, a figure who turned her fury not only against Jedi and Sith, but against the Force itself. Yet before the shadow, she was simply a woman whose greatest sin was refusing to surrender her mind to fate. She had once been timid, praised as a scholar whenever she brought discoveries, called a visionary until the moment she dared to question whether their teachings were complete, whether even the Jedi were blind. And in that instant, she was branded a heretic. Everything she had devoted her life to her rank, her identity, her purpose was stripped away, not just from the Order, but from existence itself. To them, she was no longer the respected historian, only a dangerous voice better silenced than heard. In the ashes of her former life, she chose her path. If she was denied the knowledge she sought, if thinking itself was dangerous, then she would embrace what they feared. She would master the dark, not as servant but as equal, convinced that only by seeing both shadow and light could she understand the Force without illusion. Yet, as she descended deeper, she saw that neither Jedi nor Sith were her true enemies, but pawns moved by the Force itself, the unseen jailer behind every war, every triumph, every tragedy. To her, it was the Force that had shaped heroes into monsters, guided her only to break her, and in its indifference she found the truth. Her destiny was not to defy Sith or Jedi alone, but to challenge the tyranny of destiny itself, and to strike at the Force. She realized she would have to embrace the very power she once loathed, wielding the shadows not to dominate, but to liberate. In that moment, her old self was gone, and she rose as Darth Traya, betrayer of every creed and herald of a final war against the Force itself. With unshakable belief that only ultimate knowledge could break its hold, she journeyed to the Forsaken world, sealed away in fear, Malachor 5. It was no mere battlefield, but a scar upon reality, the echo of a weapon that had torn life from the galaxy in an instant. There, amid silence and ruin, she felt the presence of two beings, Sion, the undying corpse, and Nihilus, the void that consumed worlds. Where others would perish, she chose to learn. In the catacombs of the Academy, she unearthed secrets the Jedi had buried, delving into forbidden rites that bound Sion's broken flesh and fed Nihilus's endless hunger. She did not submit, but mastered, bending every heresy and hidden truth to her will. And in time, her cunning proved greater than theirs, for she had come not as a conqueror, but as the one who would betray them all. She did what none before her dared to dream. She bent the will of Sion and Neus, binding them not through sheer might, but with a vision that carved deeper than hunger or hate. They knelt, not to a tyrant, but to a mind unbroken, a philosopher who wielded the dark not to conquer, but to shatter the very chains it wrapped around life. Yet even as she mastered every secret Malachor whispered, satisfaction eluded her, for the shadows only confirmed her dread. The darkness was no gift, but a sickness, hollowing its servants until nothing remained. She saw it carved into Sion's ruined flesh, a man of endless agony, and in Neus, a walking void of appetite, stripped of memory and soul. In rare silence, pity flickered, but contempt smothered it, for these so-called lords were nothing more than slaves, slaves to pain, to hunger, to the very Force itself. And in that realization, she saw the truth with cruel clarity. The darkness was no liberation, but another prison, harsher than the light, binding all who touched it in worship of suffering. Her story unfolded like a dark comic revelation. The Force had twisted every path, stripping away humanity and turning both light and dark into chains. Her hatred grew until it consumed not just Jedi, not just Sith, but the very essence of the Force itself. She saw through every mask compassion, conquest, peace, power, each nothing more than a tool of manipulation. And so she chose the unthinkable, to wield the darkness without surrendering to it, to master the mask in order to tear it away. Where others saw monsters, she saw victims. Broken souls who had tried to seize freedom only to become even deeper slaves. Her pity for them was sharp, but never without contempt, for they still served the very will that destroyed them. Their endless hunger proved her revelation. The Force used all, without mercy, without purpose, feeding on hope and despair alike. And in that truth she stood apart, refusing to bow to gods or guides, declaring the Force not balance, not strength, but a cold cycle to be defied. She gazed into the abyss of despair and saw a truth no prophecy could silence. The Force itself was the villain. Her crusade was not driven by vengeance against the hypocrisy of Jedi or the arrogance of Sith, but by the dream of freeing every being from invisible chains, binding them to destinies never chosen. To become that instrument of liberation, she accepted the role of heretic, embracing exile, betrayal, and bitterness. Neither saintly guardian nor power-hungry tyrant, she was something far more complex, a skeptic who stripped away dogma and shattered the illusion of light versus dark. To her, the endless cycle of war was not fate, but proof of a prison disguised as enlightenment. Her story resounds as both warning and invitation. Beware blind faith, for even destiny itself may be the cruelest oppressor. It dares every soul to confront who they are without the chains of the Force, leaving behind a legacy that whispers the boldest act is not blind obedience or conquest, but the freedom to choose even against the current of the universe itself. That is what makes her unforgettable. Philosopher and heretic, mentor and destroyer, a living reminder that true strength lies in forging one's own purpose. There is always a moment when a student sees the raw and unmasked might of their master, and for the Sith, this revelation often comes in shadows of life and death. Such a moment arrived when a cunning lord, long concealed behind restraint, was forced to unleash his full power, shattering illusion to survive certain doom. His apprentice, who once believed he grasped the measure of the dark, was left stunned in the presence of a power far greater than his own. In that revelation, history shifted. For behind every scheme and mask lay the terrifying truth of the master's supremacy. The failed strike against one master only set the stage for another, as the shadowy killers turned their blades toward Higo Damask with ruthless precision, nearly ending him. These were no ordinary foes, but the Maladian assassins, zealots who worshipped the art of killing and had claimed Jedi lives before. They cared nothing for the power of the Force, meeting it with cold devotion and perfect unity. Damask, invited as an honored guest to the secretive Caned Circle, wore the mask of ceremony while hiding the truth of his Sith nature. The gathering was meant to celebrate the rise of his ally, Lars Hill, yet beneath the hoods and robes lurked betrayal. The assassins had already woven themselves into the order, waiting for the moment to strike. When the dark current surged around him like a storm, Damask sensed the trap, but instead of unleashing his power, he chose patience, and the test that followed would push him harder than any in decades. He held back his true nature, a hesitation that nearly cost him everything. In a flash, assassins struck, severing heads and filling the chamber with spinning blades that cut down nearly all who stood within. Though he dodged, one disc tore through his jaw and neck, leaving him gasping and bleeding as killers drew their vibroblades to finish the slaughter. Clinging to life, he forced his body to mend just enough to remain conscious. There was no more hiding. His power erupted as he unleashed the dark side in full. Elsewhere, his apprentice brooded, still simmering from his own brush with death, and seething with suspicion that his master kept secrets from him, wondering when his time would come to ascend. His venomous thoughts were cut short when a trusted contact burst in, a man who knew more than he ever admitted. One of the rare few aware of the shadowed rule that bound master and apprentice together in silence. The two schemers circled each other with silent calculations, their trust bound by shadows and blood. One had long relied on the other to command assassins and clean up the Sith's filth, but when a mission collapsed in disgrace, betrayal and confession followed. A captain, shamed by failure, revealed secrets he should never have spoken, and that whisper twisted into suspicion of treachery. In his chamber, cloaked in silence, the Dark Lord turned to the window and tore open the gates of his power. He had been trained to bury his darkness so deep it vanished even among a council of Jedi, but the price was blindness, a dulled sense to the currents around him. Now, as he let it surge back, the flood nearly crushed him, staggering him with its sheer weight. The text paints him bracing himself, gasping for air, drowning in the tide of malevolence that was not his own but his master's, a presence so suffocating it drove him to the edge of collapse. And in that moment, with lungs burning and thoughts racing, one truth cut through the storm. His master was in danger, and he had to move. He raced not only to protect his master, but to prevent the Jedi from interfering. Though deep inside, he was shaken by the terrifying display of strength before him. For years, he had suspected that his master was hiding greater power, glimpsed only in secret experiments that whispered of controlling life and death itself. Now, with brutal clarity, he knew the truth his master had been holding back all along. Yet instead of fear or envy, awe consumed him, soon to ignite a burning hunger for that same dominion. As they rushed toward the district, hoping it wasn't already too late, the Dark Lord rose despite his failing hearts, drenched in blood, and unleashed devastation upon the assassin. Bones shattered, armor crumpled, lightning seared through veins, and every object became a weapon hurled by invisible force. Even as pain threatened to paralyze him, he erected an unbreakable barrier, let out a scream that ruptured eardrums, and with another surge shook the ground itself, casting enemies into chaos. This was the storm of the Sith made flesh, and his foes had just committed the final mistake of their lives. A surge of savage energy ripped through the chamber as Plagueis disintegrated his enemies one by one, the air sizzling with fury until his strength began to wane. Just as he prepared to unleash one final storm, Sidious and Pestige burst Insidious, lending his master his own dark power, while Pestige's blaster carved down the last survivors. In seconds, silence fell, and the floor was drowned in crimson. With no illusions left about the truth he had witnessed, Pestige was bound to their order forever. Yet even as Sidious urged retreat, warning that the Jedi must have felt the disturbance, Plagueis, delirious and consumed by shadow, rasped defiantly that the Jedi should come and taste the stench of darkness itself. For a fleeting moment he abandoned secrecy, reveling in death, until Sidious's reason cut through the haze, and the Master conceded with a weary nod. They fled, leaving only carnage behind. The Jedi would not breathe that poison storm today, but another would the Grand Protectorate, who would soon face judgment at the blood-soaked hands of Sidious himself. And this, indeed, was the terrifying moment. He felt the crushing weight of his master's power, a force so raw and overwhelming that for a fleeting moment the would-be tyrant found himself speaking like a voice of reason. The shock cut through his ambition, forcing him to realize that such a surge would echo across the galaxy, unmistakable to Jedi senses as well. Fearing for the survival of their secret order, he urged restraint, even as his master, barely able to breathe, still radiated a terrifying readiness to annihilate anyone who dared challenge him. That single encounter carved itself into memory, the first taste of what it meant to stand before an unrestrained Sith. From that day forward, the hunger to reach that level of might became an obsession, an endless pursuit that no weapon could ever fully satisfy. Perhaps it was this very moment that later inspired the claim that the Sith had transcended the need for blades altogether, for the Force itself was their ultimate weapon.